I woke up to the sound of a heavy diesel engine rumbling outside my house, the kind that instantly triggers an adrenaline spike because you just know something expensive is about to happen. Bleary-eyed, I grabbed my phone and rushed to the window, only for my barely awake brain to short-circuit at the sight before me. A tow truck was in my driveway, chains already hooked onto my car. Standing next to it, arms crossed with an expression of smug satisfaction, was none other than my personal nightmare, Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA. I had met her only once before, but in that single encounter, I learned two things. 1, she believed she ran this neighborhood like a personal kingdom, and 2, she had it out for me. But this was a whole new level of crazy. I yanked open my front door, storming outside in nothing but sweatpants and a t-shirt, heart pounding as I tried to process what I was seeing. "Excuse me. What the hell are you doing to my car?" I shouted, marching straight toward the tow truck driver, who looked just as confused as I felt. Before he could answer, Karen stepped forward, smiling in a way that made my skin crawl. "Good morning, neighbor. Your vehicle is in violation of HOA parking regulations, and as the acting enforcer, I have taken the liberty of having it removed. You should really read the community guidelines." She said it like she was doing me a favor, like I should be thanking her for stealing my own car from my own driveway. The absurdity of it made me freeze for a second, my brain buffering like a crashed computer before rebooting with absolute rage. "My driveway," I repeated slowly, as if speaking to an alien. "You're towing my car from my own driveway?" Karen's expression didn't change. "That's correct. This neighborhood maintains a standard of appearance, and frankly, your car doesn't meet it." I blinked. My car, a perfectly clean, well-maintained sedan, somehow didn't meet the standards of a driveway that I legally owned? The tow truck driver cleared his throat, now visibly uncomfortable. Ma'am, I don't see anything wrong with his car. Are you sure this is HOA policy?" Karen's head snapped toward him, her smug smile twisting into a scowl. "You are not paid to ask questions. Just do your job." The driver hesitated, looking at me as if waiting for confirmation. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool while my fingers tightened around my phone. "Unhook it. Right now," I said, voice low and sharp. "Because if you don't, I will be calling the police in exactly 30 seconds. Karen scoffed. "The police? Oh please. The HOA has authority here. You signed the agreement when you moved in, so I suggest you cooperate before I start adding fines to your record." She pulled out a clipboard and dramatically flipped through pages as if she had actual legal backing. I didn't bother answering her. Instead, I raised my phone and started recording. "Hey, Internet. This is what happens when you buy a house in an HOA-run neighborhood," I said loudly, making sure to capture Karen's face, the tow truck, and the ridiculous clipboard in one frame. Karen's eyes widened and she lunged toward me. "Stop recording," she screeched, but I stepped back easily. "Are you really this desperate for control?" I asked, my voice dripping with disbelief. "Do you seriously think you can tow a person's car from their own property because you don't like how it looks? You agreed to HOA policies," she shrieked. "This neighborhood has rules, and I enforce them." The tow truck driver, sensing the mess he'd walked into, quietly unhooked my car while Karen was too busy ranting to notice. By the time she turned around, the truck was already backing out of my driveway. "What do you think you're doing?" she barked at him, but the man was clearly done with this nonsense. "Not getting sued," he muttered before speeding off. Karen turned back to me, her face now burning red with rage. "This isn't over," she spat, stabbing a finger in my direction like a villain in a bad sitcom. "You will regret this." I crossed my arms, giving her my best unimpressed stare. "Looking forward to it," I said, watching as she stomped away in a huff. I should have known that was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up to a thick envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a list, yes, an actual, printed list, of infractions I had supposedly committed in the last 24 hours. Mailbox not aligned to HOA standards. lawn grass exceeding HOA-regulated length, trash can left outside for 3.2 extra minutes past pickup time. The list went on, each violation more ridiculous than the last. I sat at my kitchen table, flipping through the pages in disbelief, until one particular line caught my eye and nearly made me choke on my coffee. Unauthorized car color choice disrupts neighborhood harmony. That was it. That was the moment I realized Karen wasn't just annoying, she was on a personal mission to make my life a living hell. I wasn't about to let her win. For the next few days, I played along, meticulously following every rule just to see how far she would take it. I mowed my lawn with a tape measure in hand, adjusting each blade of grass to perfection. I set alarms to wheel my trash can in at the exact second pickup ended. I even repainted my mailbox the exact shade of beige listed in the HOA handbook. But no matter what I did, the violations kept coming. Karen, apparently unsatisfied with her reign of terror, started personally inspecting my property, clipboard in hand, at all hours of the day. I caught her peering into my backyard with a damn measuring tape, scribbling notes like some sort of deranged scientist studying a rare specimen. That was when I realized she wasn't just being petty, she was escalating. And then, the final straw. It was a Friday night, and I had just settled in with a beer when I heard a loud bang outside. My stomach dropped. I rushed out the door and there it was again, a tow truck parked right outside my driveway. And Karen, holding another clipboard. I stared at her in utter disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, already reaching for my phone. She gave me a smug smile, her arms crossed like she had just won a chess match. "Last warning, neighbor. You were given plenty of opportunities to comply. The HOA does not tolerate rebellion." I let out a slow breath, my blood boiling but my mind sharpening. "You really think you're untouchable, don't you?" Karen smirked. "I don't think, dear. I know." I smiled. "Good. Because now I have all the proof I need." I held up my phone, camera still recording, and pointed it at the tow truck driver. "You may want to step away, buddy. This one's going viral." Karen's smirk faltered. For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. And that's when I knew. She had no idea what was coming next. The morning after the second towing attempt, I woke up half expecting to find my car hoisted onto a truck, my driveway marked with chalk, and Karen standing nearby like a general overseeing a battlefield. But surprisingly, everything was quiet. Too quiet. I stepped outside cautiously, scanning the street for any sign of HOA nonsense, but it looked like any normal morning. Maybe she had finally realized she was outmatched. Maybe my video had made her think twice about pulling another stunt. Maybe, just maybe, this nightmare was over. Then I checked my mailbox. Stuffed inside was a thick packet of papers, held together with a bright red clip, as if the color alone would make it look more official. At first, I thought it was another fine, another ridiculous attempt to break my spirit, but as I flipped through the pages, I realized Karen had upped her game. This wasn't just a notice. It was a full-blown case file. Every violation she had ever accused me of was now formally documented, with timestamps, photos, and laughably exaggerated descriptions. There was a blurry image of my trash can, allegedly left out for an excessive period beyond acceptable limits, though the timestamp showed it was only 7 minutes past pickup. Another photo showed my car parked exactly where it had always been, but according to her notes, it was visibly disrupting the neighborhood's aesthetic balance. She had even gone so far as to photograph my front yard at different times of day, claiming that the way the sunlight reflected off my windows was an eyesore during peak afternoon hours. I let out a slow breath, pressing my fingers to my temples. This woman had lost her mind. It was one thing to abuse HOA rules for a power trip. It was another to turn it into a full-scale harassment campaign. She wasn't just trying to find me, she was trying to build a case against me, probably hoping to drag me into some kind of forced compliance hearing where she could play dictator. But she had made one fatal mistake. She had documented everything, and that meant I now had proof of just how insane she really was. I decided to pay her a visit. Not to argue, not to yell, but to let her know I wasn't playing defense anymore. As I walked down the street toward her house, I noticed something strange. A few of the other neighbors were outside, watching me. Some quickly looked away, pretending they weren't paying attention, but others gave me small, knowing nods, as if silently cheering me on. It was then that I realized I wasn't the first person she had done this to. I was just the latest in a long line of victims, but unlike the others, I had fought back. Karen's house was exactly what you'd expect from someone with an iron grip on HOA rules. Pristine lawn, perfectly symmetrical hedges, a mailbox so polished it reflected sunlight like a mirror. I knocked on the door, half expecting her to greet me with a clipboard already in hand, but instead, she opened it with a saccharine smile, like she had been expecting me. "Ah, Ethan. Here to finally accept responsibility for your violations." Her voice dripped with condescension, her arms crossed like a principal waiting to discipline a misbehaving student. I held up her stack of paperwork. "Just came to thank you, actually. This is going to make a great addition to my legal case against you." Her smile faltered for the briefest moment before she quickly recovered. "Oh, don't be ridiculous. These are standard HOA enforcement procedures." "Funny. I checked with the real HOA president. Turns out you were voted out months ago. You don't actually have any authority?" For the first time, Karen's mask cracked. It was subtle, a flicker in her eyes, a tightening of her grip on the doorframe, but it was enough. She knew. She knew she had no power, no actual control, and yet she had continued acting as if she did. "You don't know what you're talking about," she snapped, but her voice wavered. "Oh, I do. And so does the rest of the neighborhood. Because I recorded everything. And I'm guessing the actual HOA won't be too thrilled when they see how you've been impersonating an official and forging violation notices." Her face turned an ugly shade of red. You have no right to film me without my consent." "Actually, I do. And the police will love to see it when I file a report for harassment and fraud." For the first time, Karen looked nervous. She opened her mouth, no doubt ready to throw out some last-ditch excuse, but before she could say anything, we both heard it, a loud beeping noise, the unmistakable sound of a tow truck reversing. Karen spun around so fast she nearly tripped over her own feet. I turned to see what was happening and nearly burst out laughing. A tow truck was pulling up. But it wasn't for my car. It was for hers. I had made a call earlier that morning. After reviewing Karen's own enforcement policies, I had found something interesting. Her car was parked in violation of her own made-up rules. According to her ridiculous guidelines, vehicles had to be at least 3 feet from the curb, and hers was barely 2. More importantly, the HOA had never actually approved her driveway extension, which technically meant she was illegally parked. And thanks to her own paperwork, I had more than enough evidence to report it. Karen went ballistic. She ran down her driveway, shrieking at the tow truck driver, demanding he stop. "You can't do this. I am the HOA." The driver, who had probably dealt with her before, barely looked up from his clipboard. "Ma'am, you're not on the HOA board anymore. And this vehicle is in violation of community regulations." "I wrote those rules," she screeched. "Then you should have followed them," I called out helpfully. She spun toward me, eyes wild with fury, her hands shaking with pure rage. "You think this is funny?" I shrugged. "A little." She was so enraged she didn't even notice the police car pulling up until the officer stepped out. "Karen Davis?" the cop said, and Karen froze mid-rant. "We need to have a word about some fraudulent documents that were reported to us." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. This is a misunderstanding." "That's what they all say," the cop muttered before gesturing toward his car. "Ma'am, you're going to have to come with us." As the police led her away, the tow truck finished hooking up her car. The neighbors, who had slowly started gathering to watch the scene unfold, let out quiet murmurs of amusement. A few even clapped. I just stood there, arms crossed, watching as the self-proclaimed ruler of the HOA was carted off like a common criminal. As Karen disappeared into the police car, she screamed something about revenge, about how I would pay, but her words were lost under the sound of the tow truck hauling her car away. I stood there for a moment, taking it all in, then turned and walked back to my house. Maybe now I could finally enjoy my own driveway in peace. The silence in the neighborhood was almost eerie in the days following Karen's meltdown and arrest. For the first time since moving in, I could step outside without worrying about some absurd violation notice waiting in my mailbox or a tow truck lurking around the corner. My car sat peacefully in my driveway, untouched, unchallenged, as if basking in the glory of its newfound freedom. The neighbors, once fearful of Karen's iron grip over the HOA, now greeted me with nods of approval, some even stopping to share their own horror stories about her reign of terror. It turned out I wasn't the first person she had tried to strong-arm into submission, just the first to fight back effectively. But as much as I wanted to believe it was over, I knew better. People like Karen didn't go down quietly. Her first attempt at retaliation came quicker than I expected. 3 days after her arrest, I received an anonymous letter in my mailbox, printed in bold, capitalized font like a ransom note in a bad crime movie. It read, "Enjoy your victory while it lasts. This neighborhood has rules. People like you don't belong here." I stared at the paper, equal parts amused and exasperated. It was so painfully obvious that Karen was behind it, and the fact that she was still trying to assert control even after being legally removed from power was almost impressive in its delusion. I had half a mind to frame the note as a keepsake. But Karen wasn't content with just empty threat. That same night, my security cameras caught her creeping around my front yard, clipboard in hand, taking photos as if she was still conducting an official inspection. She moved quickly, glancing over her shoulder every few seconds, fully aware that she wasn't supposed to be there. I watched the footage the next morning over a cup of coffee, shaking my head at the sheer audacity. It was like watching a raccoon that had been chased off but kept coming back out of sheer spite. I could have gone straight to the police, filed a restraining order, or pressed charges for trespassing, but honestly, I wanted to see how much further she would go. I had already taken her power, exposed her fraud, and turned her into a neighborhood pariah. What more could she possibly do? The answer came later that week when I received a letter from the Real HOA board, requesting a meeting to discuss ongoing disputes and complaints. I almost laughed when I read it. Karen must have pulled every string she had left, begging the actual HOA leadership to intervene, desperate for some last shred of control. When I showed up at the meeting, I was expecting hostility, accusations, maybe even a last-ditch attempt from Karen to regain her so-called authority. What I wasn't expecting was how exhausted the board members looked. They sat around a long table in the community clubhouse, barely making eye contact as I walked in. One of them, an older woman named Linda, rubbed her temples like she had been dealing with a migraine for weeks. "Thank you for coming, Ethan," she sighed. "I assume you already know why you're here." I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. "I have a pretty good guess." "Let me guess. Karen's been harassing you nonstop about me?" A chorus of groans rippled through the room. Another board member, a man in his 60s, nodded tiredly. "She's been calling us daily, leaving emails, even showing up at our houses. She's demanding we restore order and hold you accountable for, well, everything, really." I couldn't stop the smirk from creeping onto my face. "And what exactly does she think I need to be held accountable for?" Linda sighed, flipping through a stack of papers. "According to Karen, you are single-handedly destroying the integrity of the neighborhood. She claims you've been spreading misinformation about her authority, inciting lawlessness, and," she paused, squinting at one of the papers, before reading aloud in a deadpan voice, "actively working to dismantle the moral fabric of the community with anarchy and disrespect." I let out a short laugh. "Anarchy? Really? Because I didn't let her tow my car?" Another board member rolled his eyes. "Oh, it gets better. She's also insisting that we issue a neighborhood-wide fine against you for, and I quote, slandering a respected member of the HOA, intentionally humiliating her in public, and damaging her reputation beyond repair. I burst out laughing. The sheer delusion of it all was too much. Karen, the woman who had spent years bullying and terrorizing this neighborhood, now wanted to fine me for exposing her? It was like watching a villain in a movie demand an apology after getting caught. "And what did you tell her?" I asked, wiping away tears of laughter. Linda smiled for the first time that evening. "We told her she's lucky we're not suing her. After all, you could press charges for harassment, fraud, and falsified violations, and we could hold her responsible for all the illegal towing attempts she authorized under false pretenses. She didn't take that well, did she? Not even a little. She stormed out, screaming about how we were all traitors to the community. I think she even threatened to start her own HOA at one point." I shook my head in disbelief. "So, what now?" Linda exchanged glances with the other board members before folding her hands together. "Well, Karen has been formally banned from any and all HOA activities. She no longer has any authority, and frankly, she never did in the first place. But we wanted to make it official. If she continues to harass you, or anyone else, we encourage you to take legal action. You'd have our full support." It was better than I could have hoped for. Not only was Karen completely powerless, but the very organization she had clung to for control had now turned against her. It was poetic justice at its finest. In the following weeks, Karen's presence in the neighborhood began to fade. The once daily tirades, the clipboard inspections, the fake violation notices, gone. Word spread fast that she had been stripped of any influence, and the community wasted no time celebrating. One neighbor threw a barbecue, jokingly declaring it a Karen-free zone. Another started an anonymous social media account posting memes about her downfall. The best part? Someone managed to get a picture of her watching the tow truck take her car away, and it became an instant hit. But the final nail in the coffin came when I spotted the "for sale" sign in front of her house. I had half expected her to dig her heels in and refuse to leave, but in the end, the humiliation had been too much. She was leaving, and the entire neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. On the day she moved out, I stood in my driveway, sipping my coffee as she loaded the last of her boxes into the moving truck. She saw me watching, and for a moment I thought she might say something, one last attempt to regain the upper hand. But instead, she just scowled, climbed into her car, and drove off without a word. As I watched her disappear down the street, I couldn't help but feel a sense of victory. Not just for me, but for everyone who had ever been on the receiving end of her nonsense. The neighborhood belonged to the people again, free from the tyranny of one overzealous, power-hungry Karen. I turned, walking back toward my house, feeling lighter than I had in months. My driveway was finally safe, my car untouched, my mailbox free of ridiculous notices. And for the first time since moving in, I could finally say it. Home, sweet home.